Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. I'd like to thank you for joining me at that part of the season we find ourselves at every year, well, certainly the last 15 years or so, where we realise that there's absolutely no chance of Tottenham Hotspur winning any silverware. It's far too regular occurrence, thoroughly depressing every time, but here we are, discussing it once again. Last night, fair play to, 61,000 or so that made their way, 61,602 is the exact number, of fans that made their way through the sleet with the Victoria line down afterwards as well to be served up that. I know the club's motto. We all know the club's motto. But quite frankly, last night it should have really been to dare is to meh. It was not to do. Let's be honest, to dare is to meh has kind of been the motto for recent years, I think, at that club. There was just no urgency. There was just no feeling that this was a big game. The only ones that seemed to really get it were the fans. I think there was even, I saw something, there was about something to be a tifo or something there was meant to be. I don't know, it was another one of the South Stand efforts, I presume it was. I don't know what happened to that. I even saw one journalist tweet out, "Get ready for the tifo," kind of thing. You're going to love it. And it was like, it did not appear. And I don't really think Tottenham appeared out on the pitch. They were, honestly, just, I couldn't tell whether they'd forgotten they were 1-0 down from the first leg, or whether they forgot that they were playing at home. I don't know. Honestly, we were just sitting there in the press box watching it, just thinking, there's various stuff you have to write in each half of the match. And I'd written so little in that first 45 minutes because there was nothing to write about. Nothing was happening. There was just no, like I say, urgency, hunger, desire, drive to do anything to change the pattern of the game. Honestly, that for me, allied with the FA Cup exit at Sheffield, has got to be one of the most whimpering, pathetic exits I've ever seen Spurs put out of a competition. I know we've seen ones before where, in Zagreb, where they've done like ridiculous implosions, but this was just pathetic. It was just I don't know if I really want to play in this competition anyway. It's such a faff having to fly around to all these countries. It was really weird. I don't know why, but and it did make me chuckle in a kind of sadistic way that I saw Antonio Conte's program notes, his matchday little column that they do in the thing. And well, here it is. I'm going to read out the last paragraph of his matchday program notes for you. "It is important that we are positive in our approach and we give you a performance that inspires you, because we need this stadium to be as loud as it has ever been from the first minute until the last. First off, there is absolutely no way." Those are the words of Antonio Conte. They sound nothing like anything he would ever say. And Spurs did none of that. If anything, they did the complete opposite. They did nothing to inspire anybody whatsoever. There was nothing positive in their approach whatsoever. Always makes me chuckle about those matchday program notes. I always remember one Tottenham manager once telling me he would always look forward to match days when he would look in the program to see what he was meant to have said this week. It always makes me chuckle. So whenever I see these, I'm a bit like, right, yeah. Sorry, the throat still sounds a little bit weird. It's not as bad as it was last time. I had actually diagnosed, I have a chest infection. I'm pumped through with antibiotics at the moment. Hopefully they're doing their job, but the throat will occasionally go throughout this, but certainly a bit better than it was in the last couple of videos. It did not need sitting out in the cold for that rubbish last night. It did not need standing on the Hotspur Way pitches for almost an hour waiting for the Spurs players to come out for their first team training session, either on Tuesday. But hey, the things we do for our work. Yeah. Honestly, that first half. Second half wasn't incredible, but at least there was a little bits and pieces where you could see that they were having a go. But that first half, it was so cagey and tentative and like just kind of tapping the ball around, just hoping something might happen, you know. Maybe they'll give us a chance to counter-attack. That would be so awfully pleasant of them. It was just weird. I don't understand what goes through players' heads when there's games like this. You know, they're on the big stage. They've got the entire, not only 62,000 people watching, or 61,602 watching them in the stadium, but they've got like millions around the world watching Champions League football as well. It's the biggest stage, they keep telling us, that they all want to be on. Every player says, I want to play in the Champions League. And then they get there, and that's what they do. There was no just excitement, cohesion, clear thought or plan or risk-taking element to anything they were doing. It was so safe and dull and predictable. But this has kind of been the Tottenham way, hasn't it, in recent years? Being reactive rather than proactive. I don't get it. I don't get it. It's, like I say, it's almost hoping the opposition come at you so that you can then counter-attack them. It's a very strange way of playing football, rather than trying to force them back with your own positive play, making them worry about you rather than be utterly concerned with how they're playing and then hope to do something back. It's, hey, that's part of a process. I'm not a massive fan of that process, but we'll come to processes in a bit. I felt the formation. Look, the 3-4-3 has worked in spectacular fashion. I think it did last season. But I do feel like last night it's never looked as blunt and like creaking as it did last night. It looked like a formation that everyone knows is coming. Look, said this a million times. It's a formation that relies on the wing-backs being creative, doing their job. And it also, let's be honest, relies quite heavily on one or two players producing moments of magic, really. So when you've got wing-backs last night who were Ivan Perisic, who was pretty dreadful again. If I'm going to give him anything as way of an excuse, he got a big whack in the first half. He was hobbling around a lot last night. So perhaps that limited what he was able to do. Emerson Royale was back to the Emerson, I don't really have to defend. Oh, pants, what do I do now? I don't really know what to do when I'm going forward. Which does not make the wing-back role work. And that's why I think when Porro came on, suddenly Spurs looked a little bit brighter in one aspect. And then, like I say, those moments of individual magic, you've got the front three, who were the front three that were scoring and assisting goals galore last season, now look like they've just met. Oh, how are you? Oh, I'm Harry Kane. Yeah. Oh, you must be Dejan Kulusevski. Sonny. It's, woeful. Absolutely woeful it wasn't. And this is obviously one of the issues with Conte being very set fast in his formation, his tactics, and believing that the players should make his formation work. Whereas obviously a lot of the managers today will, excuse me, it's going to be a running theme, the whole coughing thing, apologies. Some of the managers today, it's about adapting to how the game is flowing, what they need to do, their players, how the players are performing, can they tweak something to get a little bit more out of them and stuff like that. Conte does do that sometimes, but he's very wed to this formation. And honestly, they made quite an average Milan side, who, let's be honest, couldn't even score a goal against 10 men of Tottenham, look good for long periods and in control of the game when I don't know if they really were. But honestly, if you listen to Antonio Conte afterwards, you would believe that AC Milan squad were the greatest squad to ever walk on the pitch at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. He feels the need to remind us at every turn that they won the title last year, and that I appreciate they did. However, they're also a bit of a changed Milan side. They're not the Milan side of last season. They've lost key players such as Frank Kessie. They're 18 points behind Napoli in the Serie A table. They are not the Milan of last year. They've had some issues. They've had injury problems. Yeah, they've got a couple of players back, and I know Spurs have got injury problems. But I'm sorry, there's no way with the quality of players that were out there last night, they could not have done more to cause Milan problems other than 2 shots on target. I can't stress that enough. 2 shots on target in a home game that you have to try and get 2 goals in. I mean, I could argue 2 shots on target. That could have been the 2. But my goodness, you're leaving very little room for error there. It was a game for me. Look, I know it's obvious in hindsight and it might not have worked. But for me, it's a game where a 4-2-3-1 is crying out for it. Just having that extra creative body behind Kane and the 3 behind him. And I know Conte doesn't really have those type of players. He doesn't really seemingly want creative midfielders. It's all on Kane and Kulusevski to try to do everything, to try and create. You've got lots of willing runners, and Sonny's a very skillful running player. But looking for someone that's going to thread passes through and little clever through balls, you're looking at Kane and Kulusevski and how to push Højbjerg can do it, but it's not his natural game. In a 4-2-3-1, you have that extra person, whoever that may be. Obviously, Eriksen was the man in the Pochettino formation. And actually ended up being the Conte one in a 3-5-2 as well. But, yeah, just don't seem to have these players at Tottenham. Or if they are, they're out on loan, and whether they'd be used if they were here is a whole other thing. But yeah, I felt so sorry for the fans. With everything, going on to sell out the stadium once again, they were just given no justification whatsoever for making that journey last night. Honestly. Conte's first answer in the press conference was an Italian one to an Italian journalist. And it was just essentially, it was the one that actually, I know he said some other stuff that wound some other people up, but that was the one for me that I just found a little bit like, oh, come on. And it was, he just kept talking about the attacking danger of Milan. So, I mean, here are his quotes. Well, I think that both of the games are pretty even. First leg and second leg, just look at the data that suggests it was quite even. Perhaps in the San Siro, where we both had top players missing, and since Milan had more players missing, perhaps we should have made most of that, more of that opportunity. Over the last few weeks, lots of important players returned for Milan, including the goalkeeper, and that's important to have the best players back, particularly when you press and have an opposition who are able to get out of the press well. Giroud defends the ball, Leao attacks the space, and it gets you beyond the space. I think over the course of the 2 games, we continue to have some major absences, but the real difference was how dangerous we were in attack compared to them. They were more dangerous in attack. They have Thiago Hernandez, Giroud, Leao, who creates real problems for opposition. I think offensively as a team, we didn't create a great deal compared to what we should have created. So, look, I get it. Giroud, Leao and Hernandez, you want us to know about these talents that Milan have, and Diaz as well. Spurs have got Harry Kane, Son Heung-min, Dejan Kulusevski, Richarlison, Anor Danjuma, Lucas Moura. That's 6 attacking players that, I'm sorry, they were, whatever they were told to do, whether it was them, whether it was the tactics, whatever it was, there's no way on earth that the combined ability of those 6 players should not be causing more than 2 shots on goal. Sorry, 2 shots on target against AC Milan. Spurs had less shots in total than AC Milan. I can't remember the number. I think it was only something like 9, maybe. AC Milan were in double figures. That's just the word, pathetic. It is, and that's why afterwards, hearing all this stuff about how Milan's, attacking threat. Oh, they're at home. Spurs are at home. I'm sorry, but they should be dominating that game and they should be creating so much more. It just feels like, as Conte used the word alibis rather than excuses, it's kind of what it felt like. It's just this, it's an Italian team. Yay, Italy, I love. I, yeah, wasn't a massive fan of that, as you can tell. What else did he say? He says a little bit more on that one. He said, "We're obviously disappointed. You would expect us to be. We've made a step forward compared to last season. Last season we played in the Conference League. We didn't get out of the group. We lost away to Mura, Vitesse. Whereas this year we won our group and have been knocked out by a team who won Serie A last year." Did you know that? Did you know they won Serie A? Apparently they did. This is a huge difference compared to last year. We've been knocked out. By the same token, winning a championship or any trophy is not something you do overnight. You need to work hard. You need to get our players to develop. You need to understand what players will develop and what players will not develop. It sounds simple. Milan won the Italian championship. Did you know that? Milan won the Italian championship. Just checking it away. We played well at the end of last season. Played well in the last 10 games. I love that he's actually kind of doing down his own achievement there last season. Meh. They're only good for the last 10 games. Oh, weren't you in charge, Antonio? Oh, yeah, I guess. It was just really weird. It was just like, there was so much excuse narrative coming out afterwards. Just accept you were just poor on the day. Tactically poor, and the players were poor. Just like none of this incredible side that it's almost like it's no disgrace to lose to them. If I've got to lose, I'd rather lose to you. I don't understand it. I don't. Yeah. And I did feel bad for Conte in a way as well, because I still don't think he looks 100%. I was kind of really close to him in the presser before the game. I sat right in the front row, only about 6 foot from him. I think I asked the first question on his return to Tottenham as well, actually. And he just still looks pale. He does. He doesn't look entirely as he was, but he was kind of saying, I will bring the energy. I will do this and that. And look, he was pointing a lot. He was getting angry. He got himself booked in the game as well. I think he was trying everything, but it felt almost forced rather than a natural kind of phenomenon that he can be on the touchline. This kind of whirling, like Tasmanian devil of a character. It didn't feel like that. It may just be that I'm kind of painting it differently in my head with kind of knowledge afterwards. But for me, it was another night when I looked at the Spurs players and they looked kind of scared. I think it's the only way to put it. They looked scared of making mistakes. And just scared of expressing themselves fully. You know, we're going to talk about the differences a little bit later, and in him being away and him coming back, and you know, I just felt that last night. I just felt once again they all look a little bit terrified, and you know, it's about whether they're going to lose their place or not, and obviously that's led to a scenario where last night we saw Richarlison kind of speak out quite clearly, honestly, and quite, I guess, bluntly. Richarlison's a funny one in terms of he always looks like he's on the verge of tears, I feel. His eyes always look very, very wet during and after matches. You know, when he comes off, he's absolutely distraught. And last night, he was... who has he got caught? TNT Sports, Brazilian media outlet, got him in the mix zone. And he said, there is frustration, of course. We're out of the biggest club competition. We can't play like that, needing to score. The team had to play more offensively, especially in the second half. There's not a lot to say now. We can't go chasing someone to take the blame. Now there's only the Premier League to play, a training session tomorrow, and a match against Forest in the next round. He then... I think the question was something like, you know, were you surprised you weren't playing? I thought you were going to, kind of thing. I presume it's a reporter he knows well, because, yeah, his tone was quite conversational, and, yeah, it's obviously not going to go down well with certain people within Tottenham Hotspur, mainly an Italian. He said, I didn't understand. I was playing well. We won against Chelsea and West Ham, and suddenly I was on the bench. I played 5 minutes against Wolves, asked the reason, and no one told me why. Yesterday they asked me to take a fitness test in the gym and told me I was going to start today if I passed it. And today I was on the bench. There are things I can't understand. There was no explanation again. Let's see what he will tell us tomorrow, but I'm not silly. I'm a professional that works hard every day and I want to play. There hasn't been enough minutes given to me this season, and forgive my language, it has been beep. You can imagine what the word probably was. I don't have enough minutes. I was injured for a bit, but when I'm on the pitch, I give my life. I played well for in two games, especially against Chelsea. So I think I should have played tonight, but I can't go on crying about it now. We have around 15 games to play, and the focus is that. I'll try to score as many goals as I can because the club has paid a lot of money for me and I haven't given enough back on the pitch yet. It's fair to say my injuries didn't help and I haven't had enough minutes, but now I'll go home, rest, train tomorrow and see if he'll put me in the first 11 in the next game. After those words, I actually think he will start on Saturday. Look, I do think Richarlison is forgetting about his absolutely horrendous performance against Sheffield United. I think he's going to brush that one under the carpet. He's just talking about the Premier League games. So technically, he did start 3 in a row. I would say where I agree with him is he probably does feel like he's getting treated in a different way to others. Because look, Sonny, you know with me, he's got a lot of credit in the bank and he's done a lot of incredible things for Tottenham over the years and he's saved Tottenham a lot of times over the years. But we know it and we've spoken about it enough. He is a shadow of the player he was right now for one reason or another. You know, this is last season's Premier League joint top goal scorer and his confidence has been destroyed. Honestly, watching him last night was really, really painful. I'd go as far to say it might have been his worst performance of the season. It was up there with maybe the worst performances he's put in. And again, he's not alone. Other players on that pitch were absolutely dreadful last night. But the reason I'm kind of saying this is because with Sonny, we know how good he can be. And yeah, it was a lot of the basic things. This is the thing. I've kind of felt in other games, whereas he's got a bit of flack and hasn't been playing particularly well, but there's still been little moments where you see him come alive and you think, okay, he's done that. That looks a bit like the old Sonny. Whereas just last night, there was so little to go on. There wasn't many moments where I looked at him and thought, okay, he could actually do something. And I guess this is what maybe Richarlison is kind of getting at indirectly, is that it's almost like Conte, like I said, it's credit in the bank that Son's got. And I do agree to an extent that you keep believing he's going to come good. He'll come good with this. But there's only so long you can continue to keep starting someone and hoping they'll play well. Because there's another school of logic, really, that if you take them out of the firing line for just a little bit, take them out of the spotlight, let them mentally kind of reset, refocus, refresh, whatever you want to call it, lots of rewords, it can be a good thing for them. I'll always point back to Hugo Lloris. I know no one wants to get injured, but when he got injured against Brighton a couple of seasons ago, he dislocated his elbow, he'd been going through a bit of a tough time on the pitch. He hadn't been great. He took a couple of months out. I'm not saying Son should be dropped for months or anything, but I'm just using this as an example that kind of sticks in my mind, that Lloris came back and actually played his best, probably in the next year of his career was his best, just because he reset and he refocused. And I think the fact that Sonny has only come out of the starting lineup 3 times this season, twice in the last 3 weeks, it just kind of shows, I know there's been injuries at times, but it's almost like pushing him to get better. Whereas sometimes I think he just needed to take a step back. And I know that he will have wanted to play. And I know that a lot of fans will have wanted him to play. But I think sometimes you don't really know what's best for you sometimes. And I think this is the same with any player. I don't think you can always play your way through a bit of poor form. I think you just need to rest and get your mind out of this space you're in of constantly struggling with things that you're trying to do. And I presume that's what Richarlison's looking at. That he's come in, maybe had that bad game against Sheffield United, and it's instantly been decided, well, you're not playing in the next one. Whereas other players, and I think Kulusevski gets this at times as well, it's definitely not just Son, Obviously, Kane does, but it's difficult to. There's not really an absolute natural replacement for Kane. I think that's why he'll get away sometimes with not so great performances. But Kulusevski, I do think there's been times where he hasn't been terrific, and then he's played in the next game when maybe someone else should have had a chance. So, yeah, it's definitely not only Son. And look, I agree that Richarlison hasn't really done much to justify himself right now. He kind of touched on it in those quotes. But for a £60 million player to have not scored a Premier League goal yet, and to have only scored 2 goals and only scored in 1 game since arriving at the club, that's not good enough. So he'll argue that maybe he needs more chances to try and adapt to the team. It's a bit different for him because it's his first season at the club. But there's also Arnold Danjuma. I'm so sorry, but have they forgotten he exists? Is he like the water boy now? Does he just carry around the bottles and pass them out? Because for me, I might be going crazy. But here is a player who last season scored 6 goals in the Champions League, but most notably scored against Juventus in this round, the round of 16, and he scored against Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals. So this is a man with pedigree of scoring in knockout football in the Champions League, and he didn't even come on the pitch, despite the fact that Spurs never looked like putting the ball in the net at any point. I don't understand it. And this, for me, it's this whole culture that Conte, and he's not alone, other managers do this, but they do this big thing about, I need more depth, I need a bigger squad, I need this, I need that. They get players in and they go, no, I'm just happy with those 11. So why did you want them in the first place? Just because it would, in the event of injury. And that's all it is. It's just, he has taken on the Brian Hill role on Danjuma. He is, I know he's 26, but he might as well have been a 16-year-old work experience kid just along for the ride yesterday. It's mad, and I don't understand it. I'd understand it if everyone was smashing it, and it was a case of, well, we can't give him a go right now. Look what all the others are doing. But it's not. The others have been dreadful at times, and he's still sitting there going, why am I here? Why did I bother? Very, very weird. It's just like Conte will often stick with what he knows, and obviously it does. It only leads to further questions about whether he had any interest in having Danjuma at the club. Weird. It's really weird. You've just got a struggling attack, and it's staying the same or roughly the same in every game. There's no spark to it. There's no changes. There's no, there's no surprise to it. It's all very predictable. And when I say about Kulusevski, I think I said this in the last video, he's a 22-year-old, and we're starting to see that now. His kind of start to life in England did fool us a bit. It made us think that he was just going to be this incredible, world-class, consistent talent always. And that's not how young players are. Even the best young players, they will have little peaks and troughs, and that's exactly what's happening with him. He will come good again. Of course he will. And like I say, there's a lot of pressure on him to be in the team because of how few creative players there are at the club. And then there's Harry Kane. Harry Kane, honestly, looking at him yesterday, he looks like a man absolutely worn down, and I'll be honest, thoroughly bored by his annual task of carrying the club on his shoulders. Absolutely, you could argue, has he done enough himself? And the questions maybe will continue over in big games. Has he come up big for Tottenham in the Champions League? By his own admission, I'm sure he'll say he hasn't had a good Champions League this season. It's a competition where I think he'll feel he wants to be judged on and his goals. And if you judge him on his goals this season, he hasn't scored enough. Has he scored 1? I'm trying to think of what his goal record is this season. I can probably get it up while I'm talking, while we're all writing it in the stats. I can tell you right now. Oh, no, I can't. I can tell you when my internet decides it's going to work. He has scored in the Champions League. I was right. 1. 1 in 8 matches. 2 assists, but just the 1 goal, which I know he will not be happy with. And he stopped. He stopped in the last couple of games. I think as captain, I think he's realised, I need to kind of do what Hugo does and kind of front up after defeats. And to be fair to him, that's exactly what he's been doing. He did it again yesterday. And he was asked, is top four good enough now for Spurs, as in the only thing they've got to play for? And I kind of felt he was answering about himself as much as he was the club. He said, no, I don't think so. Where we're at as a club, we should be winning trophies. That's always the aim. The top four being the only target is a consequence of not playing as well as we want to play. Now, that's all we can fight for. So that's going to be the goal, and hopefully we can achieve that coming into the season. But for sure, it's not enough for this club. It's hard to put a finger on why it hasn't been working recently. Especially over the last week, we've lacked quality in key moments against teams that we've had good opportunities against. Not just opportunities where you're one-on-one with the keeper, but opportunities where you're in a good position on the pitch, and we need more from all of us to be more direct, more clinical. The last 3 games we haven't scored a goal, and that's not good enough. And obviously, if you weren't aware, there was the booing. And you know what? Especially the half-time and full-time ones, I've got no issue with it whatsoever. The first half was just a disgrace from a team meant to be chasing a 1-goal deficit. So there was boos at half-time, boos at the full-time whistle, and there were also boos when Davinson Sanchez come on, which we'll talk about a little bit when we come to Christian Romero. And Kane said about the frustrations of the fans, I totally understand it. Top 4 alone is not good enough for anyone at this club, especially the fans. They have the right to voice their opinion. The last week especially just hasn't been good enough. Before the Sheffield United game, the season could have been a whole lot different. You go through there, you take that momentum into the league game at Wolves and this game. But I feel like that loss last week put a dagger in our hearts. And as you can see, we haven't really recovered from that. So I don't think the decision to leave out Harry Kane from that game has really worked. They've lost every game, that game and the 2 afterwards. Clearly, Harry Kane would have wanted to start. And it's just quite interesting how much the defeat in the FA Cup has actually had a knock-on effect in the other competitions. It just shows you cannot underestimate these. Look, I said it before, and I still believe that Conte will believe, and I kind of agree with him, that team put out should have done much better against an understrength, illness-hit Championship side. I do. But it's the whole mental aspect that clearly has had a knock-on effect afterwards. And what worries me slightly, or more than slightly, is that the goals starting to dry up is a feature of like the end of days with Tottenham managers. We've seen it. We've seen it with Poch, the goals started to dry up. We saw it with Jose, with Nuno. Well, you could argue that with Nuno they dried up from the start of the season. But yeah, and it just, without scoring in 3 straight games, it does make you wonder that if Conte, well, I guess if he can't get out of this kind of gloomy period, it's only going to go one way, really, isn't it? Romero. I did say I was going to talk about Romero. It was just this moment, wasn't it, where we all were like, uh-oh. We knew what was going to happen. And I think it was probably just before Christian Romero knew what he was about to do. We saw Hernandez flying down the side. And bearing in mind, this was the guy that easily beat Romero in the San Siro in the build-up to what would end up being the winning goal of the tie. And just you could see the moment Romero looked at him, and it's just like, I'm going for it. He just had that look on his face. Just like, I'm going to go for this. If I get the ball, great. If I don't, oh well. It's like even Drago in Rocky 4. Like, if he dies, he dies. It's just... It's getting... Again, I hate to use a word, but it is. It's getting predictable now. We're kind of just assuming that Romero's going to do these silly tackles. He did one earlier in the game against Leao, very much mistimed. Sent him flying. So he'd already got the booking that meant he would have missed, if they had got through, he'd have missed the first leg of the quarterfinal anyway. But this one was just daft. It was like knee height, foot, he was flying through the air, ended up in the technical area of the Milan team. He went down with an injury that, there's some people in the press box are wondering whether he was just trying to do the old classic, oh, I'm injured, please don't book me. But I worry with Romero and his injury record that he might have actually been injured. He obviously would have gone down the slope. It's just so disappointing. It really is, because I was looking at his stats. So he's only been at the club for 18 months now. 3 red cards already. You could probably argue there's a couple more that he's maybe escaped that he could have got. I looked up his yellow cards, counted them all up. If you include, obviously, 2 for the red cards, 11 yellow cards this season, 12 last season, so he's very likely to beat last season's record. So that's 23 yellow cards in 54 matches for Tottenham, which is almost one every other game. It's so annoying because his aggression can be shaped into using it well and for Spurs' advantage, but he's got to stop himself becoming a liability, and that's what he's starting to become because they're becoming more regular. He, for me, is one of the maybe growing band of players that's gone backwards this season. This is a guy who clearly has ability. He's Serie A Defender of the Year, he's a World Cup winner, he's a Copa America winner. But sometimes in a Spurs shirt, he plays like a kid in the schoolyard. He charges around with, recklessly, I'd even go as far as saying, with very little idea of timing or discipline of where he needs to be on the pitch. And, this is what the coaches, Christian Stellini even spoke about this a couple of weeks back when I chatted to him about Romero. It's like they're trying to work with him on his timing, but how do you do that mentally? How do you just stop someone making these rash decisions? And there was no need to fly into him down that side of the pitch. If anything, head the other way. Go back towards the box and make sure that there's no way he's going to cut into that box. Instead, it was just left the team, had he even completely missed him, he would have left that whole side of the pitch open. It was just daft on every single level. You've just got to find a way to kind of get him to listen to his head rather than his heart and these weird decisions he makes. But yeah, Conte was asked actually by Spurs play if he'd suffered another injury. He kind of turned it into a bit of a talking about injuries and excuses and stuff, which I think he's got to point to a certain degree. He said, honestly, I haven't checked on his situation. I hope it's not another injury because I don't want to find an alibi. But if I have to stay here to talk about the injuries to important players missing for a long period, I hope I don't also have Romero in this list. And then we got that substitution. So, Davinson Sanchez had been being prepared to come on as soon as pretty much it happened. I don't know whether there was this half plan of, quick, make the substitution while he's still on the floor before the referee shows the card, then he can't do it afterwards. But no, the referee was standing over him. You could see he had the red card behind his back in his hand, ready to show it. And Romero, when he showed it to him, Romero was like, it's like this shock. It's like, what? Did you just forget what you just did? It was a very strange reaction. And so kind of a minute or so afterwards went by before Sanchez actually came on. I don't know, but I wonder whether had it happened in the exact moment, whether Spurs fans would have been like, okay, we see why you're doing this. But because it happened a couple of minutes later, it only looked worse. And I think from what I could see by looking at the shape of the team, the logic was that they'd been forced into this kind of makeshift back three, which had Davies, Longley, and what's his name? Pedro Porro. Obviously, you don't want Pedro Porro there. You want Pedro Porro up the pitch trying to get the team a goal. So they've brought on Davinson Sanchez to make it a proper back three again, to then push Pedro Porro up and be more of a threat down the wing. So in essence, it's like Porro's coming on for Kulusevski in a weird way, because they obviously felt that Kulusevski wasn't having a good night and Porro might have offered more. But it doesn't look like that. clearly the aesthetic is terrible. It looks like you're chasing a 1-0 deficit, so you throw on a big central defender. And that's the only way it was going to look to the fans. And then we had this. So the boos came out, of course. There were absolutely loud boos, starting the south stand and started to roll around the ground, as they realised who was coming on. It did remind me a little bit of the Lucas sub Nuno's last game against Man U when he took off Lucas, who'd actually been playing well, was probably one of the better players, and brought on Bergwijn, and the crowd really let their feelings known. And it just felt a little bit like one of those, like I said before, an end of days boo kind of thing. And there's this clip of footage that we didn't see at the time, and people around the that I know around the dugout didn't really spot it happening either. It's difficult to put an interpretation fully on it with any confidence. It looks like, if you want to see it that way, that Ryan Mason was a bit bewildered by the substitution and that he's trying to make his feelings known to Stellini and a little bit Conte, like kind of shrugging his shoulders, trying to look back towards the bench. And then Harry Kane at one point comes over and like seems to say something, and Ryan Mason shrugs his shoulders back at him. It may have been that he didn't think the sub was right. It may have also been something less confrontational. It may have been that he felt that he didn't understand why the sub wasn't being able to be made quicker. That maybe something to do with the referee or something, I don't know. And he was saying to Kane, I don't know why he isn't on yet. I don't know. You know, we would, because of our thoughts on the substitution, we would kind of frame that narrative like that, as in the original way. But I don't know. It's either way, it didn't look good. It wasn't. I wonder whether it's one of those that, I don't know, Conte has a word with him about if it was the former. I don't know. But it was kind of reflecting the views on of most people, and just thinking that Spurs had to go for it. Positives from the game. Like I said, Porro, I felt was quite bright. It was another showing where you feel like, okay, he's got something to offer. Definitely. I felt Oliver Skipp showed that he's kind of one of the few players with a bit of confidence at the moment. You can see with each start he's growing a bit more and more, and the fact that his role was very much defend, turn the ball over, pass it to the others. He did absolutely fine. I didn't think there was much to fault him on. And Fraser Forster. I thought Fraser Forster did fine, made a couple of good saves. I was having this debate with Guesty, who I do the Golden Guest Talk Tottenham podcast with. I wonder whether at this point Forster is Spurs' best signing of the summer, which is a damning indictment of that summer business. But you do wonder, you look at it, Perisic having a tough time of it, and obviously a lot of his assists have kind of come from set pieces. Longley has had some inconsistent performances. Richarlison, no way has he justified his 60 million yet. Jed Spence is away on loan. Destiny Udogie obviously didn't. He's away on loan as well. Porro's too soon. Danjuma doesn't exist. So yeah, I kind of put my case forward to Guesty that I actually think Forster has kind of come in and done exactly the job asked of him. And bearing in mind, if you're suggesting that your 34-year-old backup goalkeeper on a free transfer is your best bit of business in the summer, then, as I say, damning indictment of the transfer business. If, in case you're interested, Guesty went for Longley. Guesty felt that Longley was just done enough to take that, but even he's a loan. Yes. Not good. And I guess it all now is about what comes next. I think you kind of know my tone from the past and the way I've said it in videos and articles. It's very difficult, I think, now to see a future in which Antonio Conte is the head coach of Tottenham Hotspur next season. I don't think that's a giant leap to say. And the mood around the club is not great. the way things are going, could it end that relationship sooner than that? Quite possibly. It all depends. It's so fragile. It's now based on the moment that Daniel Levy panics about the top four. The moment that he really thinks, okay, they're not playing for him. We're not going to get top four. I'm not going to get the money. I want the money. That's the moment I feel like he panics and tries to change the dynamic in some way. But, you look at the games that are coming up. Forest, Southampton, Everton, Brighton, what was the other one? Bournemouth. I hate to use the on-paper expression, especially when it comes to Spurs, because they rip up paper every time. But those are 5 games where if they were not playing the way they are, that's 5 games where you'd expect Tottenham to start putting together some momentum again. And you never know. If they can start turning that around, then maybe they get to the end of the season, perhaps even get the top 4, and everyone then just parts amicably and they look towards next season. But that's a lot of ifs and buts and maybes in there. After the game, he delivered, again, Italian media, some quotes that did not go down well with people, the fans. It took a little bit of time to come out. I think he was absolutely soaked by the rain. So I think he had a shower and then came out. And then, the first one, one of the first few broadcasters he spoke to was one of the Italian broadcasters, Amazon Prime. And among the questions they asked, there was quite a few. He was asked whether he wanted to continue as Spurs boss. And so this is what he said, but I must stress this is with translation. So it might not have captured the exact words he wanted to use or would have used naturally. He said, "These are pretty bad questions tonight. I'm tired because I underwent an operation. I continue to work. I have a contract with Tottenham. I respect the contract. At the end of the season, assessments will be made with the club in the most serene way." Obviously, they clearly wouldn't have said serene. I'll have my way. I'll have my say. Sorry, not way, say. I'll have my say. I have a contract about to expire, and let's see how the season ends. Maybe they can send me away even earlier. Perhaps the expectations were higher and may be disappointed. What matters for a coach is trying to work and raise the bar. This year we are struggling to raise the bar. Bringing the level from average to good is much simpler. While raising it again, problems arise. So I don't think some fans have been delighted about the terminology. Where is it? Maybe they can send me away even earlier. It almost sounds like he's like, please do. I'd be stunned if the wording of that accurately reflects the way he was trying to say it. I'd imagine that it's more like, I think he said this in the past, and it's something all managers say, that, it's not down to me in the end of the season. Maybe they might be unhappy and they'll get rid of me before that. I don't think it quite will have sounded the way it's come across in that translation. But interestingly, admits that they're not raising the bar on last season and they're not making an improvement. It was quite interesting this morning. Spurs are very quick to fire out their email that they fire out to say that Antonio Conte will be holding his press conference on Friday afternoon ahead of Saturday's home game against Nottingham Forest. The implications are that an imminent decision isn't the case. I do wonder whether we get the old classic international break, let's think about everything. Obviously, you'll have the Forest result after that, ahead of that. And then the international break gives that little bit more time, doesn't it, for everyone to sort themselves out. And presumably he'll go back to Italy once again. This is the weird thing. He's kind of come back for a match and then he's going to head back to Italy again for the international. Oh, no, saying that. It's not the international break yet, is it? Sorry. Absolutely going premature there. Southampton first, isn't it? Then it's the international break. So no, it comes back for 3 games. So actually, that's fine. Ignore me. But tomorrow's press conference is going to just bring so many more questions about his future, and it will provide exactly the same answer. His answer is always going to be the same. I will tell the club my thoughts. The club know very well my thoughts, and then we'll make a decision together that's best for the future. They may not make the decision together if they continue to go the way things are going. Harry Kane was asked about Conte's future, and he said that's his decision. He's going to be the one that makes that choice. Maybe not Harry. All we can do as players is try to perform for him, work as hard as we can. That's what we're doing. I said after the Wolves game at the weekend, you can't fault the effort of the players. We're trying, we're training, but we're just lacking something. We've talked about mentality before and that ruthless hunger to be better, to be the best, to be one of the best teams in Europe. We just haven't quite found that yet. And I may have said this before, but the problem for Conte, I feel right at the moment, is that this point last season, he was in quite a position of power. There were lots of questions about his future, but he held, the ball was in his court very much. And, he's quite good when he goes into a club of doing this thing of almost like divide and conquer thing. So he goes in, shakes it all up a bit, makes some big noises, and indirectly, really, at Spurs, I guess, he pitched the fans against the owners, knowing that there's this kind of frustration bubbling over. And he's come in and said, we need to be ambitious. I'm an ambitious man. If I'm sticking around, it'll be because I believe we can do this and that. And that obviously has played off nicely with the fans wanting to see the same thing. And that's, created what it created. However, I feel like this season he's lost a lot of that rapport with the fans. There was no night, as we were trying to work it out, even though he was returning last night in front of the Tottenham Hotspur fans. I don't think there was ever any chance of Antonio. Unless I'm mistaken, people at the ground might be able to tell me. But the fact that this was his first match back, I don't remember in the early moments any chance for him at all. And I do think that's a little bit of an insight into a kind of a growing disillusionment with, I guess, his management. And look, I know there's people out there who won't want this to distract from the anger about the owners and everything. We're going to talk about the owners, don't worry. They're not getting out of this whatsoever because Conte is also the subject of attention. As I've said before, all of the above hold responsibility for how things are going this season. But I just feel like this is now just a relationship between two parties that have kind of realised they went out, they had a bit of a fling, and they've kind of realised, we're not really right for each other, are we? I think maybe we just kind of go our way, our own ways at the end of this holiday kind of thing. Even like I said, I kind of alluded to earlier, even this whole aspect of him being away has been quite awkward because he's, the club have been quite, I guess, understanding of what's happened to him this season. I think he and his staff will tell you, they've certainly said it in press conferences that the club have been good about an understanding about the three deaths in his life and the fact that obviously his family living in Italy and he's kind of jetting back and forth quite a lot, and obviously what's happened in recent weeks, the last 6 weeks or so with his emergency surgery and the problems he was having, and I also I think that goes both ways, and I think there will be a little bit of respect for each other through that, and obviously him taking Spurs back into top four last season. But it's definitely this awkwardness that, other than the absolutely pants display at Sheffield United, it is noticeable that his past three games in the dugout have probably been Spurs' worst. Two performances against Milan and that absolutely horrendous horror show against Leicester. Obviously, Sheffield United was dreadful as well, and that's on. It's on him partly still, but Stellini obviously and the coaching staff have to take that one. And look, I know because I speak to a lot of people around the club. I also speak to people around the players. And the one thing I keep hearing was that while he was away, Conte, Hotspur Way was just kind of a more, what's the way to put it? I guess a relaxed place. I don't want to go as far as say happier place, but just relaxed. I guess I used this analogy before, but it is very similar. It's like when your teacher is away for a day or two, and the substitute teacher comes in. At first, it's a bit like, oh, yeah, we can muck around, but then sometimes that substitute teacher just has a little bit of a fresh way of delivering things, and you take in a little bit more. You take in a bit. You've kind of got used to this one voice, maybe an authoritative voice, who maybe, or authoritarian, I guess is a better way of putting it. Someone that you're a little bit scared of, perhaps as well. So when he wasn't there, I don't think it's any coincidence that they beat Man City, they beat West Ham, they beat Chelsea, 3 huge home games that they won all of them. But obviously that overcomplacency set in, and that's why you got what happened at Bramall Lane. But yeah, it's just this feeling of kind of resigned acceptance around Tottenham right now, which is the most depressing part of it all. Like I said, another season where it's the top 4 is the trophy, and it's like it just really shouldn't be. 15 years without trophy, which makes it the ENIC ownership are 3 years off a quarter of a century with one little bit of silverware, and I'd go as far to say minor silverware. It's a trophy, of course it is the Carabao Cup, but would I put it in the top bracket of major trophies? No, I would not. So 22, 23 years, 22 years, isn't it? It's not good enough. It's absolutely not good enough. There's only so many times you can point at managers and point at players and say, well, we don't do the stuff on the pitch. Excuse me, but when you're the common denominator over almost a quarter of a century, I'm sorry, you've got to put your hand up and go, okay, maybe I've not been the best. But sorry, going back to Conte just for a moment, he didn't even look angry after the game. He looked really kind of like, oh well. And if I'm him, I'm thinking about my Champions League record, which is dreadful. For a guy that's won so many league titles, his Champions League record is terrible. He's never got past the quarter-final. A manager with his status and salary, silverware, CV, whatever you want to look at, should be doing far better in the Champions League than he has over the years. I know some people say there's little kind of caveats that Juventus weren't as strong as they should have been. Chelsea, they probably should have done better. They were league title. They were champions that year or the previous season. So they should have been doing better as well. Inter as well, but yeah, he just kept speaking about this important opposition, Milan. Cynical people might say that he's bigging up various Italian teams and Italian football because he wants to go back there. I wouldn't dare say that. Yeah. It's struggling, I find, as well, to find the words to inspire the fans as well. And I do wonder whether he's able to do that with the players. It's really difficult. Like I say, I think he got away with a lot of the stuff he was coming out with last. I think he wound up some people in the fan base, but ultimately he was doing well. We took him to 4th place, and and he's kind of done his job. That was probably his principal target. Whether that's right or wrong, top 4 over silver, I don't know, but you'd presume that was the target. And he did that. Whereas this year he just doesn't have that to fall back on. And when you're looking at someone like Sonny, who has been one of the best Premier League players in recent years and has become like a shell of himself, and I'm struggling to think of any player that's got better this season, bar maybe Bentancur before his injury. Perhaps you could say he was a more all-round player. It's just been a dull season, so predictable. And I think his share of the blame has increased in recent months. Because this is the problem. It keeps using these words, building a foundation, starting a process, all of this sort of stuff. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But you've got to be able to show that what you're doing resembles a process or resembles a foundation being built in any way. And that's what's most difficult to see right now. I still don't know what Tottenham are. I don't really know. If you could ask me the way they play, is there a set style of play? I don't think there is. And obviously he doesn't help himself by talking about a process and laying foundations, but showing no real intent whatsoever to continue that process or build anything on top of those foundations. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. He's kind of almost makes it sound like he's just doing everyone a favour by being there. That's the worst way to act. That's the best way to rile up a fan base and rub them the wrong way. And he's kind of almost acting like he's the first man to try and put in a process in place at Spurs. It's like, no, mate, you're one of the people they're trying to fix the process that they absolutely obliterated before. Because, we know who we're talking about. We're talking about Pochettino, and Conte, in essence, is trying to fix the utter mess created by the Tottenham hierarchy, the powers that be, that, as I've said in the past, lurch from one idea to the next, not really having any clear plan or process themselves. And this is why we're at where we're at now. We were talking about all this each passing year. And yet here we are. I can imagine them sitting there in the boardroom like, I can't believe it. I thought we did everything right. No. And look, there's obviously a suggestion that maybe they will turn back to Pochettino. And if they do, it will be really Daniel Levy admitting one of the costliest blunders as any chairman could have made. Whatever he wants to say about various things he's pleased with and proud of, or other people's faults perhaps. Getting rid of Pochettino, look, whether rights or wrongs, or whether you felt it was the right time for Poch to go or not, but in the actual act of getting rid of him, and in the, what we had almost 4 years since, of hiring and firing 3 different managers, that I think Matt Law put a tweet out today saying about, roughly that totals in itself with redundancy packages and everything, that's like about £50 million. And I'd say go as far to say on top of that, not even thinking about staff as well, the staff that have gone with them, but on top of that, think about all the players they signed, very set players for those certain managers who then aren't here or been loaned out or let go for nothing. I think it's amazing. I think it's one of the most ridiculous, costly kind of decisions. Hiring and firing 3 vastly different managers, nothing like the project that you were kind of spouting, that you were trying to create this attacking, entertaining, exciting version of Tottenham. It's just 4 years of chaos, really, and money chucked down the drain. You know what I was like at the time. You know the way I was about it all. I think and it's still, I still have that feeling now, is that there was a process being put into play. I think a lot of people, when you say Pochettino and didn't want Pochettino anymore, will always come back with, oh yeah, but remember how it was towards the end. And I agree. It was naff towards the end. It was rubbish. But what I would say, we talk about credit in the bank. I felt at the time that Pochettino had enough credit in the bank at that point. Look, the man had taken Spurs from being meh to a team that finished top 3 times, second once, top 4 again and Champions League final. He'd absolutely transformed Spurs from what they were, all while on a bit of a shoestring budget, severely limited by the stadium building. And also, on top of that, playing and trying to adapt the team to different homes at White Hart Lane, Wembley, MK Stadium, Stadium MK even for a game, and then the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium when that opened. He did all of that, and then things started to have a bit of a wobble. things started to stagnate. Players needed refreshing, rebuilding. The squad needed refreshing. And it was just almost like if anyone had earned the chance to say, look, this season's not going to be great. There's so many key players that we need to change. And because of our process and profile of buying younger players, we need to have a little bit more time to make them into what we want them to be. So this season, we might go backwards. But I promise you, we'll come back stronger for it because we'll be able to kind of get through into the next cycle properly. Did Spurs and Daniel Levy accept that? Did they? Heck. They, honestly, the first real sign of proper trouble in the Pochettino reign, and they just went, hit the ejector switch. And, you know, if you were someone that wanted to kind of liked a bit of karma or anything, essentially what came over the next 4 years and all the money it cost them, you know, you do wonder what if they put that money into actually backing him in a major rebuild of that squad. You know, we could argue till the cows come home whether the right players were bought. You could argue, were they his picks? You could argue anything. But I just feel like at that point, this was a manager who had earned the right to have a dodgy season. And look, you could maybe argue that the season before it hadn't been great and it kind of limped into fourth place. But I'm sorry, to get the team to its first Champions League final and then, 3 months of football after that gone? I'm sorry, it was wrong. It was wrong. It was all done in the wrong way. You know, and even I said at the time, I think that Poch probably did need a break, but maybe it was just because he needed a break from the way Spurs were. And I think other managers, more, you know, these big name, successful trophy winning managers have come in since, and even they've just come in and gone, like, butted their heads against the wall. They haven't been able to do anything. And, you know, the ownership, the way they operate, it's not conducive to winning trophies right now. It's just not. There's no way that they can claim that they're creating an environment where that happens. So when you've got someone that's got a slightly different way of looking at it and was trying to build something that would eventually grow and grow and grow organically into something like that, it's almost your own fault for ditching that project and heading off into short-term ones that were never clearly going to work. Just this mentality of, but he's won trophies elsewhere. No. Does not work. Absolutely does not work. And it's like amateur hour, isn't it? It's not great. There's also the question right now is whether Poch would want to come back right now. You know, from speaking to kind of people that know him and everything, I don't think it's quite the foregone conclusion that people would have you believe. I think he's made it very clear, of course, he wants to return one day, but is it the right time right now? Have the circumstances changed enough from when he left? Or have the changes that have happened at Tottenham been of any benefit to him? You know, you've got the likes of Paratici and his structure there. Is that actually one that works with Poch? Is that who we know he's a guy that's not the biggest fan of sporting directors as it is, unless he really knows them well. You know, and there's the potential prospect of Real Madrid looking again this summer. And we know they've tried twice to get Poch before and not been able to. And this time they might be able to actually get their man. And while I personally would question the logic of going there, a big club like that again after the PSG mess, it's Real Madrid. And I completely understand why a manager would want to accept that call. You know, maybe that pushes Spurs into acting a little bit quicker. I don't know. But you know, it's a tough one for me. I think it really is. And I don't think the Poch return route is as cut and dried. You know, you've heard me say before, I don't think I think there's quite a split on the board over who would want him back. And I think there were people that no doubt maybe he clashed with, you know, when he was at the club. I don't know that maybe wouldn't want him back. And maybe his return would force changes at the club. I don't know. Maybe it could be a good thing in that aspect. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, you've got, it all depends on who you believe is going to make the choice of the next manager, I guess. Personally, I don't think it's going to be anyone other than Daniel Levy. Paratici, you would imagine his power is diminishing since the ban put into place by the Italian Football Federation. We should learn the result of the appeal against that by Juventus within the next fortnight to a month. And then if that is rejected, that appeal, then that's when FIFA and UEFA would be asked globally to extend that ban. But, even before all of that, from what I understand, Levy was the driving force behind getting Conte rather than Paratici, as he did when he wanted Jose Mourinho. Before that, he wanted Pochettino after Louis van Gaal turned them down. Franco Baldini, the then sporting director, wanted Frank de Boer, but Levy wanted Poch. Pretty much the only person I could think of that Levy has kind of had to be really convinced was the right man was Nuno, and that was Paratici obviously pushing his claims. Remember, I said that he showed him video or clips of his Valencia side attacking to try and convince him. And I think the fact that Nuno lasted, 3 months of the season, perhaps won't have done Paratici's managerial decision-making stock any favours. I just remember that summer of 2021. Honestly, it still gives me nightmares now. They got Steve Hitchen, didn't they? Technical performance director, draw up a list of the progressive attacking coaches that they could maybe look at and interview. Then they brought in Paratici and ripped that up and went for a completely different list. And I remember the name that was kind of the one that lost right in the centre of all the names on the Hitchin list was Erik ten Hag. He was interviewed, it got that far. He was keen to come at that point, and Levy and Spurs just decided, I think we'll go down the Paratici route and see where that kind of takes us. And they must have regrets now, Spurs. Look, Liverpool result aside, which I was obviously watching while I was doing the last video, it's, look at what he's done there. He's gone in and he's vastly improved Man United. Not only that, there's questions about, his charisma and how powerful he could be and all that. He's gone into Man U, one of the most difficult clubs with lots of egos, and he has absolutely laid down his marker, challenged the biggest of ego or biggest of names in Cristiano Ronaldo, won that battle, and now he's getting the Man U he wants. Liverpool, as a result aside, they're playing good football, third place. They've won a trophy now, the Carabao Cup. So, yeah, I just wonder whether Spurs are looking at him thinking, would he have actually been a bit of a Poch successor? But this is what happens. You mess around and you don't show the courage of your convictions, someone else is going to do exactly that, and now they're benefiting from it. I remember that summer they spoke to Hansi Flick as well, who ended up becoming the Germany boss. Funnily enough, Paulo Fonseca was the one man who was on both lists, Hitchens and Paratici's. Obviously, that got really far. They were sorting out visas for his family and everything, and suddenly Paratici and the Spurs went, "We've changed our mind," and that didn't happen. And there was Poch. They sounded him out that summer as well in 2021, but PSG, and he was open to the idea, but PSG just were like, no, we don't allow managers to go elsewhere. That's not who we are. And it all depends on what's changed this summer, whether he still kind of has that complete belief. Like I say, from what I hear, I think it'll be a bit more of a sell that Spurs would be might be thinking it would be if they are going to approach him. Not a foregone conclusion whatsoever. And, you look at the other options. There's some varied options out there. Obviously, Thomas Tuchel, we've spoken about before. He would be available. That would then be Spurs hiring their fifth ex-Chelsea manager, and just going down the whole theme of Poundland Chelsea, wouldn't it? Oh, well, they've won there, so they must work at a club that spends a fraction of what they spend. I know Tuchel said that he was a Spurs fan growing up, but I know, having spoken to some people that know him, that there's a suggestion that he, a bit like Conte, I guess, has got reservations over whether he could win the titles he has elsewhere if he were to come to Spurs. And then you've got other coaches who would be more of a gamble. You've got, obviously, Roberto De Zerbi at Brighton, who's doing incredibly well. But he's a gamble. He's only been there 6 months. I think he's got a release clause of about 11.5 million as well, apparently. So he's an expensive gamble. You've got someone like Ruben Amorim playing nice football with Sporting. Obviously worked with young players like Porro and Marcus Edwards, of course, it used to be at Spurs. But he's untested. And, Sporting don't believe they're up there in the top, even in the top 3 in Portugal right now. So, yeah, very much a coach in progress. Thomas Frank at Brentford. I really like Thomas Frank. I sat in his press conference after the Spurs game this season at the G-Tech, and he was fascinating. I found him really, really interesting. I do think that he could be a potential candidate. I think so. Again, has there been a length of time that he's been operating? Probably not at this point, but then neither had Poch, I guess. Marco Silva, he's a bit fashionable again after doing very well with Fulham this season. Luis Enrique, of course, is still available, but a guy that's been at Barcelona, Spain, and Roma. He was at as well, wasn't he? Is that any experience? Does that prepare you for the weird experience that is Tottenham? It's so different. I think Vincent Kompany will be a very, very good coach. Obviously, it's still very, very early days for him, and obviously in the Championship, but he's obviously one to watch out for. Paratici, you'd imagine, will push the claims of Luciano Spalletti, who, like I said earlier, Napoli flying high, 18 points clear, of Milan, but they are flying high at the top of Serie A anyway. Although if I'm Spalletti, why would you want to come to Tottenham? Let's be honest. You've just had probably, one of the greatest Serie A seasons he's maybe had. And, Champions League football as well. And I guess you've got Paratici as well. If an Italian manager is maybe swayed by Paratici, you don't know whether Paratici is going to be there by the time you arrive as a boss. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't think anything at this point in time, unless there's an absolute disaster on Saturday, is going to happen imminently, as in like the next 24 hours, unless there's a bust up or a blow up behind the scenes. I mean, Conte was speaking in his press conference to us about things just not changing overnight at Spurs in terms of trying to become challengers. He said, we're working to try and improve and go step by step, but if someone thinks that in 1 day, 1 year, you start to win, it's difficult. I know that to win you have to build, you need time, and you have to go step by step, and to accept this type of defeat, because I think Sheffield United was unacceptable. But today, for the opponent, for the trophy we play, I don't like to lose, but it can happen during the path to have this type of situation, especially, I repeat, because last season, don't forget, we played in Conference League, and 2 years ago, Europa League. Now we're playing again Champions League, but to play Champions League, you have to improve your level because the level is high. In the Premier League, it's really difficult because you can see in the table really strong teams who stay in difficult positions, but we have to know that it's not easy. At the same time, the only way is to continue to work. I'm really sorry for the fans. But we cannot invent the win. This is important to know this. We cannot invent the win or hope for a miracle one day that a trophy goes into our training ground or pitch. We have to build and have patience. I understand for the fans they don't have patience because for a long time Tottenham is not winning. But what I can promise is that we continue to work really hard for this club to try to improve, and then we see what happens. So, yeah. Depends what you think of those quotes. I don't know. It's very much... it's just classic Conte, isn't it? It's like, that's the club. That's what you got. I don't know. I think he does... There's an element I agree with, and that Tottenham do make it very difficult to be a successful club for managers. But I also think others have shown that it doesn't have to be that way. And, what happens next, I think Harry Kane will have a say. At a time when you're trying to convince Harry Kane, I think it'd be difficult for Harry Kane to force his way out this summer unless Spurs just get a ridiculous offer, because I just can't see them accepting a not particularly great bid from an English team. I almost wonder whether Tottenham would be more prepared to lose him for nothing the following summer just to get another year out of him. It's maybe more financially beneficial if, let's say, he were to fire them, I guess, into the Champions League than it would if he left and they weren't able to do that. I don't know. But, do you involve him heavily in the process of who will be the next manager and who he wants? Is that who you try and get just to keep him happy and maybe get him to sign a new contract? I know no player is bigger than the club, but my goodness, Harry Kane is a hell of a player, and to lose him over another poor managerial decision would be criminal. It really would. Conte said some other little bits and pieces on his future. He spoke about foundations again and trying to find the right solutions to the transfer market. And, then we'll see. Now we have to finish the season. I have a contract until June. I'm happy to work in Tottenham, but at the end we'll make a decision, okay? But the club knows very well which is my vision. What are my thoughts about the situation? Yes, we know. So Saturday brings Nottingham Forest. Forest's record is absolutely horrendous away from home. 1 win from 12 matches. I think they've got 3 draws. It's a game that Spurs and Conte have to win. If they don't, I do fear that the managerial mayhem will be back with us. Just for me, I've said it before and I stand by it 100%. Spurs need to find their identity again. I don't know what their identity is. It was meant to be all this beautiful football, attractive football, entertaining football, doing things the right way, playing young players, bringing them through. I feel it's just got lost with Daniel Levy kind of doing his little Britain like, I want that one, and just deciding suddenly, I love that manager. I want that manager. I want that one. Let's do this. Yeah, but that doesn't fit the profile or anything we've been doing before. Yeah, I know. I don't care. I want him. And it's just like, yeah. They need to play good football again. And the fans ultimately just need to enjoy supporting Tottenham Hotspur again. I don't know when the last time they could really say they did that. And it just feels like another kind of trudge through a season again this time around. I honestly think that the fans would accept a season of going backwards slightly in terms of where they finish if they enjoyed a lot of the football and they could see the path they were on and they could see where it was heading. I don't think that Spurs have ever truly understood that, the powers that be. But there you go. That's just me. What do I know? Right, I'm going to head off. This chest infection is probably not being helped by speaking for an hour and 22 minutes. Press conference tomorrow. Forest at home on Saturday, and then I shall talk to you again on Sunday, and we shall discuss where we're at with everything. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.